For decades, Anthony Quinn and John Wayne were seen as towering figures of classic Hollywood, two legends whose names carried power, respect, and myth. On screen, they embodied strength, honor, and unwavering masculinity. Off-screen, however, their relationship was far more complex than audiences were ever allowed to see. For years, rumors quietly circulated about tension, rivalry, and unspoken disagreements between the two icons, but neither man publicly addressed it. Until now, Anthony Quinn, known for his commanding presence and emotional depth, spent most of his life refusing to comment on his true feelings about John Wayne. Fans assumed it was mutual, respect or old-school professionalism. Yet those close to Quinn always hinted that there was more beneath the surface moments of frustration, disappointment, and truths left deliberately unsaid. Hollywood's golden age was not kind to honesty, especially when it threatened carefully protected images. What makes Quinn's late-life remarks so startling is not anger, but clarity. He didn't lash out. He didn't settle scores. Instead, he spoke with the calm of someone who no longer felt the need to protect illusions. His words reframed how people now view John Wayne, not just as a screen legend, but as a complicated human being shaped by power, privilege, and the times he lived and died as these revelations resurface. Fans are left questioning everything they thought they knew. This wasn't a scandal meant to shock, it was a long-delayed truth, spoken when silence no longer served a purpose. And once you hear what Anthony Quinn finally admitted, it becomes impossible to look at Hollywood's most iconic cowboy the same way again. Anthony Quinn's perspective on John Wayne was shaped not by headlines or public opinion, but by years of shared space in an industry built on hierarchy and image. From the outside, Wayne was untouchable, a symbol of authority whose presence alone could command a set. But Quinn experienced a different reality, one that rarely made it beyond closed doors. According to those who later heard Quinn speak candidly, his observations were rooted in patterns he witnessed repeatedly, not isolated incidents. Quinn noted that Wayne understood power better than most. He knew exactly where he stood in Hollywood and how far his influence reached. This awareness, Quinn believed, shaped how Wayne treated people around him. Directors, producers, and studio executives often deferred to him while co-stars were expected to fall in line. For actors like Quinn, who valued independence and artistic range, this environment could feel suffocating. What troubled Quinn most was not Wayne's confidence, but his resistance to challenge. Quinn suggested that Wayne had little patience for viewpoints that didn't align with his own. On set, disagreements were rarely framed as creative discussions. Instead, they often carried an unspoken warning. Step too far out of line and consequences could follow. This dynamic, Quinn felt, limited genuine collaboration and encouraged silence rather than honesty. Quinn also reflected on the contrast between Wayne's public image and his private demeanor. To fans, Wayne represented integrity and moral certainty. Off-camera, however, Quinn described a man deeply invested in control over narratives, over people, and over how history would remember him. This wasn't portrayed as cruelty for its own sake, but as a byproduct of an industry that rewarded dominance and discouraged vulnerability. Despite these tensions, Quinn never publicly confronted Wayne. In the golden age of Hollywood, speaking out carried risks that few were willing to take. Careers could stall overnight, opportunities could quietly disappear, and reputations could be reshaped without explanation. Quinn understood this reality well. Silence, while frustrating, was often the safest option. As time passed, Quinn's understanding of Wayne became more nuanced. He acknowledged that Wayne was also a product of his era, raised in a system that celebrated rigid ideals and discouraged self-reflection. Quinn didn't excuse the behavior he witnessed, but he contextualized it. He believed Wayne genuinely saw himself as a guardian of certain values, even when those values excluded others. This realization brought a sense of sadness rather than resentment. Quinn reportedly felt that Wayne's refusal to evolve ultimately limited him, both as an artist and as a person. While Wayne remained immensely popular, his range never expanded in the way Quinn believed it could have. For Quinn, this was a missed opportunity, not just for Wayne, but for the industry as a whole. When Quinn finally chose to speak, it wasn't driven by bitterness. It came from a desire to correct the record, to add depth to a story that had been flattened by hero worship. He wanted people to understand that legends are not immune to flaws. and that acknowledging those flaws does not erase their contributions. In sharing what he saw, Quinn offered a rare glimpse behind Hollywood's polished curtain. His words challenged the idea that silence equals respect. Sometimes he suggested silence simply means survival. And in breaking it at last, Quinn wasn't tearing anyone down, he was reclaiming his own truth. Long buried beneath decades of carefully maintained myth. The tension between Anthony Quinn and John Wayne was never loud enough to make headlines. Yet it was strong enough to shape the atmosphere around them. In an era where image mattered more than honesty, discomfort was often hidden behind forced smiles and professional courtesy. To the public, they appeared united by mutual respect. Behind the scenes, however, the dynamic was far more complicated. Quinn later suggested that the strain stemmed from fundamentally different worldviews. He approached acting as a craft that required emotional exploration and transformation. Wayne, by contrast, represented consistency and authority, rarely straying from a familiar screen identity. This difference wasn't merely artistic, it reflected deeper beliefs about masculinity, leadership, and control. Those beliefs quietly clashed whenever their paths crossed. Hollywood at the time was not a place that encouraged open dialogue. Challenging a powerful figure could be interpreted as disloyalty or arrogance. Quinn understood that Wayne's status gave him an unspoken advantage, one that extended beyond the camera. Decisions about casting, creative direction, and even personal reputations often flowed through a small circle of influence. Wayne sat comfortably within that circle. Rather than confronting the tension directly, the industry chose to normalize it. Discomfort was dismissed as rivalry. Unease was reframed as professionalism. This allowed studios to maintain a smooth public narrative, while ignoring the emotional cost paid by those working within the system. Quinn felt this pressure acutely, aware that any public disagreement could be misinterpreted as ingratitude. What made the situation particularly frustrating was the absence of resolution. Nothing ever exploded, but nothing was ever healed either. The strain lingered, subtle yet persistent. Quinn reportedly carried that awareness with him, even as his career flourished elsewhere. He moved between roles and cultures, carving out a path defined by versatility rather than dominance. Over time, Quinn began to recognize that this silent tension was not unique to his relationship with Wayne. It reflected a broader pattern within classic Hollywood, one where power dictated comfort, and those without it learned to adapt. The system rewarded those who fit neatly into its ideals and quietly sidelined those who challenged them. Even respectfully, as years passed and both men aged, the tension remained unresolved. Public tributes and interviews continued to paint a simplified picture of unity. Yet Quinn's later reflections reveal how much was left unsaid. He did not describe Wayne as a villain, nor himself as a victim. Instead, he described a system that placed men in rigid roles and punished deviation. The industry's choice to ignore these undercurrents had lasting consequences. It created legends without nuance and stories without context. Fans inherited myths rather than truths. Quinn believed that this selective memory did a disservice to everyone involved, including Wayne himself. Without acknowledging conflict, growth becomes impossible. By finally addressing the tension, Quinn wasn't reopening old wounds. He was giving them a name. He understood that time had softened the stakes, making honesty safer than it once was. His words invited audiences to see beyond surface narratives and recognize the complexity behind iconic figures. In doing so, Quinn challenged a long-standing Hollywood tradition, the idea that legends must remain untouched. He believed that truth does not diminish greatness, it deepens it. And by breaking the silence, he offered a more complete, human portrait of an era that has too often been remembered in absolutes rather than realities. The question many people now ask is simple. Why did Anthony Quinn wait so long to speak honestly about John Wayne? The answer lies not in fear alone, but in the unwritten rules that governed Hollywood for decades. During the height of both men's careers, loyalty was valued more than truth, and silence was often mistaken for professionalism. Speaking openly could be interpreted as betrayal, no matter how carefully the words were chosen. Quinn understood the fragility of reputation in a system controlled by a few powerful voices. One misinterpreted comment could follow an actor for years, shaping how they were perceived by studios and audiences alike. For someone as outspoken and expressive as Quinn, restraint became a survival skill. He learned when to speak, and more importantly, when not to. There was also a deep sense of respect involved, complicated as it may seem. Quinn recognized John Wayne's cultural impact in the devotion of his fans. He knew that any criticism, no matter how measured, would be amplified and potentially distorted. Rather than risk reducing a complex truth into a headline, Quinn chose patience. He believed that some stories needed time before they could be told responsibly. As the years passed, the industry itself began to change. Conversations about power, behavior, and accountability slowly emerged. What once felt dangerous to say became necessary to discuss. Quinn, now older and removed from career pressures, found himself in a position to reflect rather than react. The urgency of protecting opportunities had faded, replaced by a desire for clarity. Another factor was perspective. Time allowed Quinn to separate personal frustration from broader understanding. His later reflections were less about individual moments and more about patterns. He wasn't interested in revisiting old arguments. He wanted to explain how systems shape behavior and how silence enables them. This shift in focus gave his words weight rather than bitterness. Quinn also understood the responsibility that comes with speaking late in life. Final reflections carry a different kind of authority. They're not shaped by ambition or rivalry, but by a need to leave an honest record behind. For Quinn, this wasn't about settling scores. It was about telling a story that had been simplified for too long. When he finally spoke, the tone was calm and deliberate. There was no sense of triumph in breaking the silence. Instead, there was a quiet acknowledgement of complexity. Wayne was neither hero nor villain in Quinn's account. He was a man shaped by power, expectation, and an industry that rewarded certainty over curiosity. This restraint surprised many listeners. They expected dramatic revelations or sharp criticism. What they received instead was nuance. Quinn's words invited people to think rather than react. He trusted the audience to handle ambiguity, something classic Hollywood rarely allowed. By waiting, Quinn ensured that his voice would be heard without immediate consequence. He also ensured that his reflections would be received in a different cultural moment, one more willing to accept that icons can be flawed without being erased. In that sense, timing was everything. Ultimately, Quinn's decision to speak was an act of closure. It allowed him to reclaim his own narrative and offer insight into a relationship long misunderstood. He didn't break the silence to change how people saw John Wayne. He did it to complete a story that had been left unfinished for far too long. Anthony Quinn's reflections on John Wayne do more than reveal a complicated personal dynamic. They reshape how people think about Hollywood's golden age itself. For decades, the era has been remembered in black and white terms: icons as flawless, studios as glamorous, and the industry as a dream machine. Quinn's candid words remind audiences that reality is far more nuanced, full of tensions, compromises, and silent struggles that were invisible to the public eye. By speaking openly, Quinn reframed Wayne not simply as an untouchable hero, but as a human being influenced by the pressures and privileges of his time. The revelations do not diminish Wayne's legendary status. Instead, they provide a fuller understanding of the man behind the myth. Audiences are now able to appreciate the craft and charisma while acknowledging the limitations, contradictions, and challenges that shaped his behavior. Quinn's decision to finally break the silence also offers insight into the unspoken rules that governed Hollywood for decades. The industry thrived on control, hierarchy, and the careful management of image. Actors were often forced to suppress personal truths, not because they lacked courage, but because speaking out could jeopardize careers. In this context, Quinn's patience and timing reflect both wisdom and resilience, illustrating that telling the truth is sometimes as much about when you speak as what you say. For contemporary audiences, these revelations spark reflection on the broader themes of power and legacy. What does it mean to be a legend? How do we reconcile talent with imperfection? Quinn's story demonstrates that admiration need not require denial. Understanding a figure's flaws does not erase their achievements. It deepens the appreciation of their humanity and the choices they faced within a restrictive system. Moreover, Quinn's honesty provides a model for examining other historical relationships and figures. It encouraged critical thinking rather than blind idolization, inviting viewers to consider the complexities that often lie beneath the surface. In doing so, it fosters a more mature, thoughtful engagement with Hollywood history. Moving beyond myths to the real people who shaped them. The impact of Quinn's words also extends to younger generations of actors and creatives. It underscores the importance of authenticity, patience, and timing when navigating powerful systems. Quinn's courage in speaking after decades of silence demonstrates that truth, even when delayed, carries influence and significance. His reflections offer lessons not only about past icons but about enduring values in any career or life pursuit. Finally, Quinn's revelations humanize both men simultaneously. While they expose tension and difference, they also highlight respect, restraint, and shared understanding. In painting this nuanced picture, Quinn provides a rare glimpse into an era often romanticized, showing that even in the golden glow of Hollywood, complexity, conflict, and courage were ever present. In conclusion, Anthony Quinn's decision to finally speak about John Wayne transforms a long-ignored narrative into a story of insight, reflection, and human complexity. It reminds us that legends are not only defined by their achievements, but also by the realities they navigate, the relationships they manage, and the truths they choose to reveal. Through his words, Quinn not only clarifies history but enriches it, offering audiences a fuller, more profound understanding of two of Hollywood's most iconic figures and the industry that shaped them.